Hey everybody, I hope you're there. I'm here. I'm trying to go live. I'm going to give everybody a minute or so to uh, sign in. And hi again. I hope you're listening okay. I'm here in DC. I'm going to give everybody a minute or so to get settled in, get a cup of tea, and relax. I assume you're at home or taking a break from work. I'm glad that you're here anyway. I've been doing nothing today. I went out in the morning in the rain and then came back in with the dog, and he didn't really want to walk very far in the rain, but I'm happy that he was there. And is some company for a nice walk. We had the storm Isaias came through here and has been nuts yesterday, but now it's stopped and it seems like it's cleared up and it's a nice day outside in DC. So I'm checking my text messages with my friend LB Kovac to make sure that we're good to go, and when we are, then I'll just get started. This is my home office where I am. Both my kids use this as bedrooms, and now they're grown, so it became an office. I wish I were in an actual office some days, but I'm just seeing people logging on, which is fun. All right, so I'm going to get started. Imagine back wintertime, Chicago, February, freezing cold. I had been a reporter for 4 days, and not even. I didn't study journalism. I fell into my first job. 4 days I've been a reporter. I was working at the City News Bureau of Chicago. I was walking back to the office. I saw smoke. Reporters are the original, if you see something, say something. So I saw smoke. I had to call the office. They said, yeah, there's a fire coming in Uptown, go. And so I ran as fast as I could to the smoke. And I got there even before the fire department got there. I could hear the sirens, but they weren't there. And it was a apartment building, 4 stories, like a whole block long, and the whole top floor was in flames. And people were leaning out the windows. It was so hot, they were leaning out to get away from the heat. And some of them were holding their babies out, and they were dropping the kids down to people below 4 stories who were catching them. And other people had jumped out and they hit the ground and were dragging themselves through the snow to get away from the heat. I knew that I had to get to a phone, so I started banging on doors. I got it to this lady. She looked at me like didn't know what I was saying, but I'm not sure she spoke much English. I said, I need the phone. She let me in. Basically, I ran over her. I got to the phone. I called the office. I said, there's this fire. It's an apartment building, and it's burning like crazy, and there's people jumping out of the window. Hang on. The operator says, I'm going to give you a rewrite. So I get a woman named Holly Gilbert. Her job was to translate all of my information into a news story. And she said, okay, how many trucks and how many pumpers? And I said, but do you not hear me? There's people jumping out of the windows. They're throwing kids out. How many trucks, how many pumpers? Long pause on my part. Okay, truck, she says, is the one with ladders. The pumper is the one with hoses. Okay, I can do that. So the apartment where I was calling from across the street, I could see out through a big picture window. And I counted the trucks and the pumpers, and then she said, all right, here's what you need to know. How many injured? Where are the injured going? What time did it start? Where did it start? And she said, oh, what's the address? I don't know. I hadn't written down anything. I didn't know what I needed to know. So she gave me a list of questions, and she said, go run out there and find the chief. He'll be wearing a white hat. So I ran out, and now it's complete chaos. There's firefighters all over, and they're in one place. They're pushing this car. They smashed into this car to get it away from the hydrant, and they're pushing it away with a metal pole. There's ladders and hoses and firemen running in and out. And I see this guy. He's an older man. He's wearing a fire suit, and he's got a white hat. So I went over. I got my notebook, my pen. It's so cold, the pen barely works on the paper. I go over there. Hey, Chief, what do you got? And he looks at me with pity, really, and he says, "Son, I'm not the chief. I'm the chaplain." And I'm like, "What do you mean you're the chaplain? What about the white hat?" I didn't say this, but I looked, and he had a white hat on, but it had a red cross on the top. So he said, "The chief is over there," and he points me to this even scarier looking, serious guy who's yelling at everybody to do things. He's giving orders, and so I go over. But now I'm confident now because I got the chief. I got my notebook. "Chief, what do you got here?" And he goes, "What the bad word? Do you think I bad word? Now get the bad word out of here before I bad word." So I honestly just slinked away. I was so, I didn't know what to do. I knew I had to get all these questions, but I wasn't going to go back and talk to the guy. Just then this TV truck rolls up. 4 reporters. Well, there was a camera operator, a sound person, a producer, and then the on-air guy. They get out and they approach the chief, and they've got this boom mic pointing at his head like a lance. And then the chief, he sees the red light on the camera that they're recording, and so he becomes all Mr. Professional Media Relations guy, and he starts answering their questions. And the reporter's asking the exact same questions that Holly told me to get. So perfect. All I had to do was write down the answers. And they were almost in the same order that Holly asked me. So I wrote down the answers. I ran back. I gave all the information to Holly. And then she gave me even more questions when I came back out. And at this point, there's a bunch of reporters, a bunch of firefighters, police. There's people all over. And so I started interviewing people and got answers to all of my questions 3 or 4 times. I went back to the office, and people clapped when I came in. And it was my first story, and they were happy for me. And it was really loud in the office. There were all these typewriters going, and police and fire radios, and everybody, the editors yelling, and reporters on the phone. And I walked over to Holly's desk. I'd never met her before. And I introduced myself, and I saw the story that she had written, and it was all of my words, but into a news story that had all the facts, but it was also dramatic and exciting because the fire was hugely emotional and intense. And then in the background, they always had an all-news radio station, and the announcer started reading a story about the fire, and it was my story as told to Holly, coming right back to me. And it was such a great moment, and really then I decided this is what I want to do with my life. So thank you all for being here for a live talk. I wish we were in person somewhere, but because of the virus, we're doing these virtually, thanks to L.B. Kovac at LSU Press, who is my publisher. And she's been terrific about getting me attention and helping me get the word out. And like we do on the Home Shopping Network, here's the book, available at bookstores everywhere and from LSU Press. So this, I was fortunate to be published by LSU Press, which is at the Louisiana State University, because they have a great series on foreign correspondence going back to the Crimean War. And the series is edited by Jack Hamilton, who's a journalist, educator, author, really talented, fun guy who helped me along the way with the book. So this picture is from Somalia, and I'm on a amphibious landing craft with the Marines. And you might have heard about these landing craft. Over the weekend, or late last week, there was an accident at Camp Pendleton when one of these landing craft was returning from a training exercise back to the ship, and it sunk, and 9 young men were killed, 8 Marines and a sailor. And the oldest one was 23. And I had an opportunity to be with, I was with those Marines in Somalia, the Marines from Camp Pendleton, several generations ago, probably the grandparents of these young men. But I just feel bad for their families, and I spent a lot of time with soldiers and Marines, and uh, the Marines, as we were invading Somalia in one of these amphibious vehicles, I was sick to my stomach, nauseous, tired. I've been up, and I was scared. They're singing, we will rock you," and they're stomping their feet and banging their weapons on the thing. And we're in the ocean, so we had just come out of a ship. The doors of the ship opened, and we came out, and we're floating. And then the engine starts, like the propellers, and we're propelling towards the beach. But you can't see anything. You're in this sealed vault-like thing. But there's water coming in from all over, seawater coming in. It's leaking like crazy. And the guy who was in charge, who was like 20 years old, he says, "All right, if you feel sick and you got to throw up, throw up in your helmet, because otherwise the chunks will plug the drain holes." I'm like, oh my God, I don't want to plug the drain holes. It was scary, but they were pumped. I mean, that's what they do. So I'm going to talk for about 15 minutes, and then I'm going to take questions. I hope you have questions. And we'll see how it goes. So my first story I told you about in Chicago at City News Bureau. Then I went to El Paso, Texas for a couple of years. Then Mexico City, 5 years, covered Latin America. And then I went to Washington to cover the Pentagon. So 10 years from my first story, and maybe 2,000 stories under my belt, I'm a much more experienced reporter. I was out in the desert in Saudi Arabia with the U.S. Army, about to go into Kuwait and then Iraq. This is the first Gulf War. When Iraq invaded Kuwait, the United States and the rest of the world basically said you cannot do that, and planned a military action to get the Iraqi army out of Kuwait. I was riding along with the U.S. Army and Artillery Brigade. There were about 4,000 reporters in the brigade. I was the only reporter. There was no public affairs person or anybody that was looking out for me. I basically had been adopted by this brigade. So the colonel, named Maury Boyd, he said, well, there's two ways we could do this. He said, one, you could stay on the outside like a typical reporter, and at the end of the day, I'll brief you on the operation and what we did that day, and then what's ahead. He said, option number two is that I could read you into the battle plan, and I'll tell you everything, and then you could just be like a fly on the wall. You can come in and sit in all the meetings. Nothing will be off limits to you. So I'm like, well, yeah, door number two. So then he said, okay, but if you take door number two, the all access pass, then you have to stay for the duration, because you'd know too much. If you were ever captured by the enemy, and they got the secrets out of you, then all of our lives would be at risk. So at that point, they were thinking the war would be several months, and there would be thousands of casualties, including some journalists. But as a reporter, I didn't see any option. I really had to take the inside look, and he was true to his word, and I was able to witness everything. And ironically, I guess, I was at the point where I was afraid they would do something wrong, because if they did something wrong, I'd have to write about it, and then they would feel like I had betrayed them. I thought this was the calculus going on in my head at the time, but the decision made me decide a bigger thing, whether, not just about being a reporter, but are you an American first or a reporter first? And I had to choose to be an American first in that case, in that I was going to protect the American secrets. And the proof that I chose patriotism, I guess, or to be an American first over being a reporter, is that if I had the Iraqi war plan or the enemy war plan in any conflict, I would publish it without any question. But in this case, I decided to keep the U.S. plan secret and stay with them. So now, go another 10 years in the future, and maybe 300,000 stories under my belt. And the big number is because at this point I'd become an editor, and I was no longer just writing maybe 3 stories a week, which is what I normally did. I was editing 100 stories a day, or supervising editors who were editing 100 stories a day, and we had 50 people in the Washington Bureau, and we had stories coming in from all over the world. So I touched a lot of copy. Um, and funny, at this point, after being a reporter all those years and a foreign correspondent, I was now the old guy at a desk deciding who was going to go to war. So when the United States was about to invade Iraq for the second time in 2003, I was the Washington bureau chief for Scripps Howard, and we had assembled a team of 13 people who were going to go to cover the invasion. And they were newspaper reporters, online journalists, and TV reporters. And one of them was a guy named M.E. Springelmeyer. And he was a veteran reporter, really good, solid guy. But he and I disagreed on this fundamental question about, are you a reporter first or an American first? M.E. believes still that he's from planet journalism. Okay, he's not from the United States. He's not from any other country. He doesn't represent anybody except the story. So and that's fine. I mean, in journalism, there's a big ongoing debate about this, and you can disagree and still work together. And so he goes out in the first day of the invasion, and he's in a Humvee with 3 or 4 other soldiers, or 3 or 4 soldiers and ME, and he's sort of tagging along with them. They get separated from the main convoy and get stuck out in the desert. They honestly don't know where they are, and they're not sure how to get back, and they're not sure even if they're safe. There's shooting going on, firing, tank battles going on all around. So the guy who's in charge of the soldiers, he says, look, we're going to try to sleep, but I want one of you to stay awake for 2 hours, just be on sentry duty basically for 2 hours. And he told me, he said, I need you to do your 2 hours too, because then we can get more sleep, and I'm going to give you a weapon, and you're going to be protecting us for 2 hours. And Emmy said, no. He said, I'm not here to fight. I'm here to observe. And those guys at that point, they weren't really ready for this sort of interesting debate about journalism and ethical issues. They were like ready to dump him out in the sand and just keep going. So they went back and forth for a while, and then he said, all right, compromise. I will do my 2-hour shift, but I'm not going to take a weapon. If they come and we're in danger, I'm going to wake you guys up, and then you can shoot them, but I'm not shooting them. And so M.E., because he was the reporter, he had a notebook, and he kept the times in a log. So each soldier down, and his name intermixed with them every 2 hours. And he brought that home after the war. He came back and he was safe, and he had it framed and gave it to me as a present and a reminder of this debate that we've always had about whose side are you on. So most of the stories in the book, it's called Finding the News, published by LSU Press. If it's really about journalism, how I learned to be a journalist, the enduring values of journalism, what journalism is. But there's a separate story, a strand that runs through the whole thing, which is about love and family. I was living in Mexico City. I had been a reporter for 10 years at this point, and I had only been in Mexico City for a few months. My Spanish was okay, but not great. I totally exaggerated my Spanish abilities to my boss, but I got better as I was there. So I didn't have any friends. I always worked, and really I was a new guy in a new city, and it was a strange place. So I was bored one night, restless. I went to the movies by myself, got my popcorn. I'm sitting in the front row, getting ready to start, and I kind of look around, and I see this woman in the couple rows behind me, and she's beautiful. And she had short black hair, and she was wearing jeans and kind of like a trench coat, raincoat, and her leg was bouncing up and down like she was nervous. And I thought she was waiting for somebody. I thought, a woman that beautiful, she's not going to be at the movies by herself. after the movie's over, I'm thinking, well, I'm going to say something clever. And I look back and she's still alone. So I plan my exit so I come out of the place right as she's coming out. And I chickened out right at the last minute. So then I went outside, and it's a beautiful night in Mexico City. The place is lighted up and lots of cars and traffic. Everybody's walking arm in arm. Families are out. I saw her again. This time she was standing by the bus, or by the bus stop, waiting for the bus, and there were 2 cars lined up, and these guys in the car were like, hey, come on, súbete, ven, mamacita, get in the car. It was obnoxious. They weren't going to kidnap her or anything, but she was clearly uncomfortable. She was standing there looking straight ahead, trying to ignore them. So I had crossed back, and I came up behind her, and I tapped her on the shoulder, and she jumps up. And I said, in my broken Spanish, I said, do you want the bus to wait until it comes? And she's like, sure. And so we started talking and changed numbers and then started dating. And so 36 years later, 2 kids later, a couple of houses, some ups and downs, we're still married. Best thing I ever did. And she has a whole different version of our story, but she'll probably write her own book someday with that version. But so what I think about what I wrote, my career, 40 years of doing this, what's changed about journalism since I covered that fire in Chicago? Well, obviously the technology has changed, and for me it's changed for the better. But I believe that the values of journalism have not changed. The underlying core values of quality journalism have not changed. Now, we may not be true to those values all the time, but the values are still there. I boiled them down. I went through this in the book about how to talk about our values, and I came down with 3 as the core values: speed, accuracy, and fairness. Speed because that's really a competitive environment is what makes us better and keeps us honest. If the more reporters chasing a story, the more different perspectives on it, the more different angles, the more facts will be revealed, and we also keep each other honest. If a reporter makes a mistake, the other reporters will go after that and point it out, which is good. Accuracy seems like the very minimal standard of journalism. I mean, that's really what people pay for, is the accuracy. You have to get the facts right. And then for the final one, the overarching sort of umbrella value, I went back and forth. Is it objectivity? What's the word? And I came down on fairness, because I believe that there's something instinctual about fairness in humans, that we understand the concept right away, that even a little kid will, if something happens, they'll say, that's not fair. They can't maybe explain what's fair and not fair, but they know when they're a victim of something that's not fair. So I mean fairness to the people that you're writing about, to the story, and especially to the audience, that you want to be fair to the audience. Are you telling them as close as possible to the way it is? That's what you want to do. And it's exactly the same as I had in that first story that I was talking with, or giving the facts to Holly Gilbert. She took all of that chaotic information, all my impressions, my opinions, my bias, everything that I was throwing at her, and she put it into a pretty straightforward news story that still captured the intensity of the moment. So, and that's really all that journalism is. Everything that happened to me in that first fire is what kept happening to me over and over again. And I got better at reporting the story, and but it's something that you just keep getting better at, hopefully your entire career, your entire life, really. If the values have not changed, the standards have changed and behaviors have changed. 3 examples. One, I believe that when I was a reporter, and certainly the reporters I learned from that generation, they had an attitude that we will know a lot and will publish some small piece of that, that we're going to become experts, and then we're very, very careful about what we say in print or later on TV or on the radio. Now it seems to have flipped, where reporters are quick to pass along information that they're not sure about or that they've heard, or they retweet. If you ever hear a journalist or a reporter say, "If true, this will be a shocking revelation." What do you mean, if true? Why are you even saying it if you don't know that if it's true or not? An example of how it's changed, and see, it's not necessarily good to know more than you report all the time. For example, during World War II, there was a club in Washington. I'm a member of the club now, called the Gridiron Club, and it's dedicated to one night a year of having a dinner with the president and the White House and the Congress and the Supreme Court and all the big media people in Washington, where everybody lets their hair down and drinks too much and eats too much. And it's supposed to be one night of fun. The hotel we used in the 40s was the Capitol Hilton, and that hotel was built specially with a lift to get President Roosevelt at the time up to the stage without anyone seeing him. And the reason for that is that he was in a wheelchair because he had polio, and he usually was photographed sitting down at a desk, or if he was standing, he'd be leaning against something or leaning up against another person. So all the reporters knew about Roosevelt's condition, but they usually didn't talk about it, they usually didn't write about it, and they usually didn't publish photos of him like that. And the idea at the time was that we were in World War II, and they didn't want to transmit the image of so-called weakness, because in those days disability was looked at in a different way than now. So that's just an example of how reporters knew something that was a legitimate part of the story, but they kept it to themselves. A second difference is that there are fewer agreed upon facts now. And I go back and forth in my head about that, is that maybe it's actually that there's fewer agreement, the significance of the facts is not shared, and that people see the exact same thing completely differently. And I learned this the hard way when we had a website called Red Blue America. It was supposed to be a website that had, you could register as a red, conservative, or a blue, liberal, or a purple, sort of independent. And the idea was we would have this reasoned debate every day about the topic of the day, and people would become well informed. Oh my God, it did not work at all. Blues would only read blues, and reds would only read reds, except to yell at each other and scream and troll and be nasty. We had to shut it down. I mean, it didn't work. It was disappointing to me. The third difference is with the current president, and our job, as we saw it always before, was to expose things and, try to get inside the president's head and figure out what was really going on in the White House. This president is out there. I mean, if you follow his Twitter feed, which you pretty much have to do if you're a reporter, you know what he's thinking. I covered all the presidents from Carter and Reagan on, and I always wondered, what are they really thinking? What are they thinking at 2 a.m.? With this president, So, and the problem is that the Washington Post and others are tracking, well, the Washington Post version is called false or misleading statements made by the president. So it's up to 20,000 since he took office. 20,000. And we thought that our job was exposing those things, but it seems like we're in a parallel universe with the president. We meaning the media, the news media, the reporters covering him. I think that he has changed the rules of the game, and the reporters haven't figured out how to catch up, and he's actually better at media, at manipulating the media, than a lot of the professional media people. And my only regret really now at this point, after writing the book, which I'm very happy about, is that I'm not a reporter, and I see things that I want to write about, and I don't have a way of doing it anymore. The job was basically go out, travel around, ask people questions, and then tell everyone else what you find out. And they pay you. Oh, that was such a great job. So I miss it, but and I didn't know that I wanted to be a journalist when I was a kid. There are kids that have a passion for something, and parents are always asking, what's your passion? I didn't have a passion for anything. I do remember two things that my mom always told us when we were little. Whenever she heard a siren, she would say, "Oh, good, someone's having a baby." And then the other one she would say is, "If you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all." So, and both of those things, that's terrible advice for somebody who's going to grow up to be a journalist. But I got over it, luckily. I knew that in college, though, that I wanted to do something meaningful with my life and something important, and something that made a difference. And I found that in journalism. And the reason I called the book Finding the News is for two reasons. One, that's what we did. We went out and found stories. But two, I meant that it gave me a mission and a purpose. When I found the news as a calling, it gave meaning to my life, which was important to me. And I didn't even really know, or I certainly couldn't have put my finger on why it mattered to me at the time. But now, looking back, I understand how lucky I was. So we're at a key moment for journalism now, and the technology that's really empowered us and enabled us to travel around the world and broadcast live from everywhere, for me to do this with you now, all of that technology has been helpful for transmitting more information. But it's blown up the traditional business model that supported journalism. And so you have to look at two different things. One, there's the journalism itself, the craft, the practice of reporting the news, and then there's the business that supports it. That's the part that's broken. It's really a business problem rather than a journalism problem. We haven't figured it out, and I'm not sure how it's going to be resolved, but the business of news is in great transition, and it may be just that it's moving away from a straight advertising model to subscription model. I'm not sure, honestly. I don't know. I don't think anyone knows, and it's my best guess has changed many times over the years, so I'm not sure where it's headed. But even more so then, it means that we have to stick firmly to the core values, and now more than ever, speed, accuracy, fairness above all. And that should be our guiding principle, no matter what the platform or whatever the new flavor of the day is in terms of media, business or media distribution or media platforms or social media. Whatever those, we all have standards of behavior that we know and that we should stick to. And I'm talking about for journalists, but I think that those are good rules to live by for all of us that are on Facebook or on Twitter or TikTok or Instagram. Speed, accuracy, fairness. I think that this is a key period, and we're going to look back on this as a revolution that ended up being better for journalism. And if we could stick to our core values, ride out this current business crisis, then I think we're headed really for a golden age of journalism, when it's going to be better than ever. So thank you for being here for my quick talk. And if you have questions, file away. I'm looking here and I don't see any questions, so post something. I'm checking on my phone too. So let's see. I have people watching, so that's good. Thank you all for watching. But I don't see any questions. So, LB, are you there? Or can you give me the high sign? LB, who's helped me with this from the beginning and helped me all through the publishing process. She's really been great. And everybody at LSU Press has been helpful and fun to work with. They made the book better. It's nice to work with a good editor. One of the things that I miss now when I do some writing is that I don't have an editor like before. And they've been great and very supportive. Okay, so I'm gonna sign off, but thank you all for coming. And if you have any questions, just post them to me on Facebook, and I'll get back to you, or send me an email. My own website is petercopelandnews.com, petercopelandnews.com, and send me a note. I'd love to hear from everybody. And thanks for supporting me in the book.